Welcome back to Timo's Dinky Detailing. Today I'm going to be working on a Studebaker pickup truck. This is a French toy, and it's going to be a hybrid model made partly with the Studebaker, the cab and chassis to be precise, and then this came in a box of many parts, and these were both incomplete models. And so I've matched these two together. They don't fit together perfectly, but the bed is certainly the right size. So you can see they're both in reasonable condition. They've been scratched up, they're play worn, and so I kind of jammed those together so I could do the sequence on the turntable. And there's a piece of noodle on there. So anyway, I looked up this one. It's a trailer for a mechanical horse, and I'll show you a picture of it later. And this is a Studebaker pickup truck. Now, these were made into various different versions. So this type of chassis was done up with a bed on the back, actually had a tipper as well, and also was a wrecker. And there's a little there's a whole bunch of little places in that chassis for fitting stuff for those different models. So here it's got a small steel base underneath, so I'm going with the Dremel tool and this tiny burr and taking off the heads of the rivets, which is working well for me. There's almost no setup time for doing these, so it makes the model go a little bit quicker. So there, the base is off now. It's a little bit dirty. Most of the paint is good. Well, here's the mechanical horse, Dinky 415. And to me it's a kind of an ugly model. Apparently it's fairly rare, but I can't imagine people going out and paying a fortune for these things. They would have to be completely mint. Anyway, it's not the most beautiful thing. I don't have all the parts, so I'm just going to use the back of this and combine it with the chassis that I don't have a back for, and put these two together. So first comes off that tilting front wheel thing, and it doesn't need real wheels because it's actually on the model, it's standing off the ground when it's attached to the mechanical horse. And the rear axle, I'm not going to reuse any of these axles anyway. It's convenient for me to cut it off. Now I have to take off this bottom because the supports for the wheels were too wide. It's too narrow that I could have it straddle the chassis. It's about the same width, so off they come on the bandsaw. So that's the way it's going to look, and it's sticking up a bit. I have to file the bit that I cut off. So I'm using my safe edged file, and then of course the first thing I do is jump right up on top of that, the back of that tailgate. I didn't do much damage other than take a layer of paint off. So here's the wheels. There was only two, and they were painted black. So for the other wheels, I'm going to have to find some other wheels that I saved from other projects, and I will replace them. So these go into the bin for stripping the paint off them, and I take it outside onto the deck. I put freshly boiling water from the kettle, and then I put caustic soda, and it makes quite a thermal reaction, and that strips the paint off pretty fast. So this one was pretty simple. The paint came off very effectively with that method, and so now I've got my castings. They look really good. This one though, it's dented on the one side, so I'm going to have to straighten that out. Now to straighten it out, I've realized I have to make a spreader clamp. This is going to be a spreader. Of course, it's just a big hinge. But I have to make straight working surfaces, so I cut off the end with the curved bump with the with the countersunk hole, and that way I will just have two flat-ended flaps to this hinge. Now I clean it up on the grinder. Just a little touch up to make it take off the sharp edges. I could have done that with a file, but let the machine do some work. So here I'm preparing hole, the center drill, and now I go in with my diameter for tapping a hole for, what is it, 1032 screw that I'm going to put in there. And now I go in with the same drill, and I go through the hole I just drilled, and I go in and make a little dimple on the other side. So I don't go deep at all. I'm just making a dimple so that the screw will ride inside that dimple and not slip off of it. So now I get a tap out, and I'm just going to use this this hand tapping handle. And I put it in the vise. It's a little bit hard to get the thing to go through straight, but I get a nice hole, and here's my screw for this. And then I need it to go into the dimple, so I need to take the end off and sharpen it, and I buff it up a little bit so that it looks nice and clean. And so when I put it in here, it's a very fine thread, so that gives me more leverage, so that I'll be able to use this for spreading that casting. Now I don't want to go too far with it. I don't want to stretch the other side outward, basically. So I put it in the vise. That's going to prevent the other side from moving, and then my clamp is going to push the other side. Now, this is my really quickie design of a spreader that I figured out, and I already have some good ideas. I'm going to make another different spreader. It's a little bit too flimsy, and it's not ideal. So I have a plan for another one for a future episode. I'll show you. So here you can see I'm tightening the screw, and it's hard to see that it's actually straightening this thing out. At the bottom you can see the screw turning, so it's spreading those wings. But what's happening also is the steel looks pretty thick there, but it's actually a bit too thin for this purpose, because it was flexing a little bit. But it's still stronger than the casting. So I took it out here, and we'll see how it looks. So that looks pretty straight. So that worked out well, and there's no risk there that I would bend it too far and break it off or something. So now I didn't do it before stripping the paint, but I'm drilling out. There's 3 holes there that will hold screws that will hold the base back in place. And you can see it's not difficult for me to hold that thing in place. There's a block of wood underneath that paper towel, and it lets me just align it by hand, and it's a lot quicker than clamping it in the milling vise. And the problem was, in the milling vise, the shape is always wrong, so you can never clamp it securely, so the thing's going to rock in the vise. So this is actually an improvement in several ways. Certainly is a lot faster to do it. Now, to attach this, I've got to find a place. So I'm going to fill in one of these gaps with a little piece of aluminum, and then I'm going to screw into the only place. It's a very thin metal, but that little stop pin for that pivoting trailer hitch is thicker. So I drilled a tiny hole, and now I'm putting a tiny thread in it. And this is a 256 tap, this tiny little tap, and it fills that little pin completely. And so it's got me a little bit worried. I mean, it goes all the way through to the other side, so that we're not going to lose the whole thread, but it could easily break off the sides of that little post. So I'll have to do something to strengthen it. So here's my piece. I put it back in. Now I'm going to try and find out where the hole lines up. And so I'm marking the thing. I had a little bit of trouble trying to get that thing properly centered. So that goes off for drilling. And I put JB Weld on this thing to support the sides of that. You want to put the JB Weld supporting that little pin before it breaks rather than afterwards and trying to patch it all up. So I use the same batch of JB Weld. That stuff has to dry overnight, so there's plenty of time to work. I put a piece of a pop rivet head in there, and I screw the two together, and so you can see that's holding. But I want to glue it all in place, and I want to glue that pop rivet in place, so I have a long hole. And this way, the screw comes further down. It's easier for me to work with, and then just trying to go into that piece of aluminum. And I don't have to cut the screw because it's a tiny screw. It's a pain to cut it and then not damage the threads when you're cutting it. So back to these holes. You can see I've done the hole. It's just a through hole that's just there by my thumb. And then these ones are being tapped for the 440 button head cap screws. That will go on the base and hold it together, and they'll look a little bit like a real rivet. Again, I'm using this spiral fluted tap into the blind hole because as you turn that, the swarf from cutting comes up and out of the hole. Now I'm reusing these screws, the ones I use for painting now, and then I'll often strip them when I have a chance. When I'm stripping a model, I'll throw a few of these screws in there and strip the paint off of them so I can keep using them. I don't want to waste any screws, so I'm going to reuse them each time, but if they're covered in paint, I can't, eventually I can't put the Allen key in there. Now I needed some baggage, so I've 3D printed some bottles and painted them with transparent green. And these are little champagne bottles, and they're all on one sheet, and that's because there's a crate that goes with it, which I've painted brown. I actually painted this with red oxide primer, but it looks perfect. It looks like brown wooden crate. So I made a bunch of these, and that's going to go as the baggage that's going to be carried in this trailer. So now I've got that red oxide primer, and I'm going on with the red. I'm doing this whole model using spray bombs because both my airbrushes are plugged, and I've got to unplug them or buy a new airbrush because I use some paint that doesn't want to clean out. So a model like this is a good candidate for using a spray bomb. So I'm happy it goes very quickly, and there's no cleanup of the airbrush afterwards. But in many cases I can't do it. I can't have every color of spray bomb. They're very expensive. And then these cans have a system now where you can spray upside down, but you can't clean the nozzle out. So before the can's ever empty, the nozzle gets plugged and you have to throw it in the garbage. It's kind of sad. And then it's nearly impossible to find replacement nozzles. That's got to be deliberate. So now I'm getting the inside of that box. I did the bottom earlier. And I have to say the spray bombs worked very well on this project. remember to like, share, and subscribe to my videos, and try and spread the word a little bit, and because it would be nice to have a few more viewers. I don't actually make any money from these. YouTube won't let me. So here I've printed an interior, which is based on interior for a Commer wrecker that I built a couple of years ago, and I just modified it, made it smaller, changed the shape around a little bit. So now it's time for some decoration. Now I wanted to make this look kind of old-fashioned. I chose an old-fashioned type of lettering to put on it, and I wanted to choose a name that sounded interesting, and thinking, well, what interesting names can I think of? And I remember writing an article that included a quote from William Makepeace Thackeray. So I thought Thackeray is an awesome name, so why not put that on this vehicle? It's going to be a winery vehicle, so it's going to be Thackeray's Orchard or something. So on the cab goes decoration for the door as well. So there you have it, Thackeray's Fine Wines. I'm using my new technique. These are very fine foils for making these decals, and they get folded over really easily. So I found a technique, and I'm using it here too, where I cut around with a X-Acto blade. It doesn't cut the backing paper, but it just cuts the film so that I can hold on to something with the tweezers, and then that way it doesn't have a chance to get folded up at the corners, and it frustrates me when it gets folded. But since I've been doing this, I've been having very good luck and not having the corners of the foil folding over. Once it folds over, it's impossible to get it unfolded. So I think that looks pretty nice. Now for this interior, I'm going to put windows. You can see there's a thing with two holes in the front. It's actually a slot for putting this plastic in. I've done this on a few models before. It's a very convenient way of holding the plastic in place, and I can get it at an angle, and if I cut the thing right, here it's too narrow. I just put it straight up, so I'm going to have it like a T shape. So this was just a first test. So I've got to cut another one. I actually wind up cutting two, but I'm going to show you the final one. So there we have. Actually, I think this is the second one. The second one had a flaw that there were cuts in inside corners. There were cuts that came up into the glass, and you could see it, and you can see it there. So I actually made a third window where I cut it carefully with an X-Acto knife, not scissors, because the scissors go past the corner of the cut. If you look carefully, you can see there's the cut coming right into the windshield. So here I'm trying to measure up the axles, in this case for the front, and I've just put the rod in there, or the tubing, and marked it with a small Sharpie, and then I'm putting it into my collet block, where I've got my 2mm collet that's being held on by in my 5/8 5C collet that's designed. I mean, I tried to look for a 2mm collet, and I thought, well, it saves the trouble of that little plastic adapter, but I couldn't find. I'm sure they have them, but they're not in sets, so they're not the ones that you can get from India or China, you probably have to buy an individual one. That I would have to find a supplier. I could get ordinary sets on Amazon. So instead I just made my own 2 millimeter collet. Here I'm cleaning up the end. So it's a little bit ragged after cutting it with the Dremel tool. So I clean up the ends, so they need to be square for one thing, but they also need to take the burrs off of them, because otherwise they won't even go through those holes. So here I've got a piece of drill rod, a little bit smaller than 2 millimeters, and I'm trying an experiment to put the thing together and put the wheels on each end. And I've got it loose in that collet, but I'm having trouble. I want to figure out a way where I can just measure these things and make it easy to cut them to the right length. And I think at this point this is probably more trouble than it's worth. I'll figure out a better way to do it, but this is the way I did it on this model. So now I take those wheels off, and that rod is already in the right position for the length that I need, and I just put it up beside the tubing that I want to cut, and I've already got a mark there. I'm just demonstrating how I want to do this. It's not ideal. So here's the other axle that I cut just by putting it in there and marking it, and it looks like it's pretty much the same length. You can see you can't hardly see the mark. I have to get a different or newer Sharpie because it doesn't leave much of a mark. It doesn't even show up on the video. So once again I go in with the cutoff tool of the Dremel tool and take that end off. So it's very simple making these axles. It's a little bit of work setting it up and measuring and everything. And then I've got my axle mushrooms, and I keep them in this little pill bottle because, and it has a captive cap. I really like these pill bottles. You don't lose the cap on the floor, which I would be doing all the time. So I need 4 of them, so I get 4 out there, and then I'm going to go and polish the heads. These are bronze colored. I got these off of Amazon. You can see below where they are in Amazon Canada, and then you have to check if you're in UK or in Australia or US. You're probably going to have to look at a different Amazon, obviously, but you'll see what the product is called and what it should look like. So it goes on to the bench grinder with the buffing wheel, and there I'm putting a bit of buffing compound on there, a bit of rouge, and it's really a couple of seconds, and it takes off the artificial bronze finish, and it looks beautifully shiny right away. So front axle I can make by just putting the wheels on the axle and putting the mushrooms in the end. I'm using a little bit of 5-minute epoxy because this one it just goes over the forks, and then the base goes over top, so I don't have to actually install these right on the model. So for somebody doing the old-fashioned way, where you're either hammering at the axle or spinning a drill with a nail set or something on the end, well, you'd be able to do it with this one fairly safely, but I'm doing this method because there's very low risk. I'm not hammering, and I'm not drilling away where it can come off and go through my finger. Now for the back, this has to go through the chassis, so I've got to assemble it all. So with all my wheels, and here I'm putting, of course, this is out of sequence because 2 of those wheels are already on an axle, aren't they? So I put those on there and put a little bit of 5-minute epoxy. It's tricky to get the right amount inside that hole so that it's going to hold that mushroom in and not spill out and glue itself to the hub. So now it's time for a little decoration on the box. So one is for the license plate and the other one is for another bunch of grapes, just to put on the back of the box to make it more interesting. So here I've got little license plates. These are actually older than the model, but I don't think the license plates changed too much in the 5 years or so. But I'm having some trouble with these decals. By putting the thing on, I've completely destroyed the number off of the number plate. I'm going, holy cow, I can't even see it. So let's try another one. I printed a couple. So here's another one. Try and be more delicate. But it smudged it up pretty badly. So I spray the next one extra layer of spray on top so that it wouldn't get damaged. And it actually looks a lot sharper and clearer. Even the other ones looked bad even before they went on. I don't know. So anyway, that came on pretty good, and I've got one extra bunch of grapes. So I didn't want to waste it. It looks very pretty. I'm not sure it enhances the look very much, but it's there now. And the other thing I wanted to add was some tail lights onto the back of the chassis, which is almost useless because they're not really visible on the final toy because the box overhangs so far. But anyway, they're going there, and one day some child will be playing with this thing and he'll look at it and go, look, there's taillights under there. Or otherwise he would look and say, wait a minute, there's no taillights on this truck. So here's the color ones. The color ones I'm doing on the inkjet printer. I'm able to control the color better, but they have to be protected, not like the laser. So that one I damaged the thing again. So I've got another one. Yeah, and I'm able to get a higher resolution with the inkjet printer. So the white stuff is being printed on the color laser printer, and the color ones are on the inkjet printer, which have to be oversprayed after the ink dries, or it'll just dissolve in the water. So here I'm painting the front grille. This is way too complicated for me to try and tape it all together, so I decided I'm going to use the brush-on Vallejo paint, and this silver is pretty good. In the end, I paint another coat over top of it of the much sharper metallic-y paint from Mr. Hobby that I have, just to give it a little bit more oomph, and it came out pretty good, I would say. So I'm not going to tape this one up, which usually is good, but this one comes out pretty nicely anyway. So now we're at the final stage. I got to take out those screws that have been in there when it was being painted. And I will be putting these screws away, and then next project, when I strip paint, I'll just throw them into the box, the plastic box that I strip paint on these toys, and it'll come out cleaner and I can reuse them. So my front axle goes on there. It's in the right length. And here's the base. I didn't repaint this one. It looks in really good shape. It has some scratches on that bulge that holds the axle in, but I decided I'm going to leave it. I like the paint over the lettering, and I can never get it as good. So I thought, why don't I leave this? It doesn't have any rust on it or anything, so it's good enough for me, and I would rather keep at least that little bit unrestored. So I got my stainless steel screws in there, and then snug them each down. I think they look a little bit like rivets. Now the box goes on, and I got to line up the screw with the hole on the box, which is surprisingly challenging. See, I'm moving the box around to try and make sure the thing goes into the hole. So eventually I get it in there. And then I snug it down, and that's done. It's just the one screw holding it on. So the last thing is for me to put some cargo in here. So these are the original tires and another spare tire from another model. And then my cases of champagne that are going off to market. So just to remind you where we started. So it's a hybrid, so these are two different models, but the parts fit together well, so I can combine them and make a complete model that I wouldn't have otherwise. So let's see what it looks like now. Alright, well that's a fantastic change. It just looks beautiful. The gorgeous red paint and the brightly contrasting yellow box on the back. You would never know that these two parts weren't meant to be together, that this wasn't an actual toy that was released. It came out beautiful, and I started out not sure what to think about this one, and in the end, once again, it's the most beautiful model I've made, and I just fallen in love with it. It just looks beautiful. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Timo's Dinky Detailing as much as I enjoyed doing it. Until next time, be seeing you.